Hey everyone, Mike, Colby, David, and I make up Group 1, and today our presentation is focused on Apollo 1. I am Max Gallagher. I'm a second year civil engineer here at UW-Madison. Now I'll let Mike, David, and Colby introduce themselves right before their slides. Today, Mike will be going over the background information to start. We'll tell you about what is Apollo 1, when it happened, where it happened, how it happened, everything. Then Colby will go over the risk analysis of what happened. He'll go over what would happen if companies aren't able to learn from the mistakes of Apollo 1. At the end, David will go over the ethical dilemmas and issues that presented themselves during Apollo 1. Before we get to the presentation, however, I'd like everyone to participate in a little short activity. Close your eyes, close your eyes for a minute and imagine you're lying in bed. It's Friday night. You've had a long and exhausting week. You made yourself a nice smoky steak dinner earlier and are ready to pass out for the night. Suddenly, you hear a blaring beeping sound, and you smell something burning. You left your stove on and a fire has started. What would you do in this scenario? Would you rush to put out the fire or ignore it and just keep sleeping? In Apollo 1, NASA ignored the warning signs and prepared for liftoff. Thanks for participating in that. I'd like to hand it off to Mike now to get us started with the background information.
Thanks, Max. Hello, everyone. My name is Mike Erickson. I'm a civil engineering student here at UW-Madison. Today, I'll be going over some of the background information, some of the context about Apollo 1, and then I'll be diving into the details of the event. So Apollo 1 was supposed to be the first of the Apollo missions and the final step in America's mission to land on the moon. This was spurred on by the words and promises of JFK in 1961 to land on the moon by 1970. Project Mercury and Gemini had already spent spacecraft and humans into space for extended periods of time. The nature of the first Apollo mission, originally titled Apollo 204, was to do much of the same, with a focus on testing the new Saturn rockets and spacecrafts that would be used for the coming Apollo missions. Apollo 1's goal was to send the spacecraft into low Earth orbit for a short period of time and then come straight back. North American Aviations, or NAA, was contracted for the construction of the Command Module 12, also known as Block 1, seen here on the right of the slide. This was the capsule that would contain the astronauts during their flight. Construction began in 1964, and just 2 years later, in conjunction with NASA, the spacecraft was issued a certificate of flight worthiness. This certificate cleared the spacecraft for its space flight, given the completion of open orders identified by quality assurance tests. After a series of more tests and improvements at the Space Center, the module was approved for the plugs out test in January at Cape Canaveral. The plugs out test was scheduled for January 27th, 1967, less than a month before the date of the mission was to take place. A plugs out test refers to a test where the spacecraft is completely disconnected from the launch pad's electricity and support systems, left to run on its own internal power, and then it's ran through a comprehensive pre-launch test that is supposed to be exactly the same to launch day protocols. There is no liftoff during a plugs out test, only testing of the spacecraft up until that point. According to reports of the incident published by NASA, after initial tests were run, the crew entered the command module around 1 p.m. EST, where they were hooked up to the oxygen and communication systems. The simulated launch countdown was paused at this point, as the astronauts noted a weird smell in the oxygen line of their suits. According to the final accident report, the smell had nothing to do with the fire. The countdown resumed, and the hatch was sealed behind them, and then the cabin of the module was pressurized with pure oxygen gas. The simulated countdown was paused again at this point for 2 hours to fix communication issues, and then continued when no resolution to these issues could be found. The first report of a fire came at 6:30 p.m., 10 seconds after instruments reported an electrical surge and other abnormalities in the command center. Investigation of the event shows that the crew immediately followed emergency protocol and began to try opening the hatch. 20 seconds after the fire was reported, the module ruptured and smoke and fire billowed out. Communication with the crew was lost at this point, and seeing the fire, nearby launch pad personnel rushed over to help open the hatch, which was opened 5 minutes later when firemen arrived on site. Doctors arrived, and at 6:45, Virgil Gus Grissom, Edward White, and Robert Chaffee were pronounced dead. The command module and spacecraft were immediately impounded and later removed for thorough investigation to determine what caused this tragedy. Now I'll hand it over to Colby, and he'll go over some of the risk analysis of the disaster in more detail.
Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Colby Haas. I am a second-year aerospace engineering student here at UW-Madison, and today I'll be going over the risk analysis portion of not only the Apollo 1 mission, but also other companies and industries if they did not follow the example set by NASA. I'll go over the financial and the economical risks first. The financial risks include cost of not improving safety, which then can lead to more accidents and liability costs from damaging to not only the engineering equipment, but human lives, and also loss of government grants and funding from pending lawsuits from these loss of life or other effects like that. Some of the economical risks include missed economic benefits for space specifically, such as satellites used for like GPS and space exploration, and less technological advancements in the space industry and in the aerospace industry as well. The financial and economic risks of a company not following the example of what happened at NASA can be astronomical. The cost of major accidents, such as Apollo 1, can quickly add up, not only in monetary value, but in social and long-term effects on the company as well. Some of these social risks include public backlash from the government, the effect of the government funding, and from the families that suffer from the loss, and growing scare of space exploration as the public may deem it as dangerous, and which then in turn can slow the space advancements. Some of these short-term versus long-term effects. It is cost-effective in short term to look over some of the safety issues and some of the repairs that must be done, but it is detrimental long-term from the effects including loss of life, loss of funding, or even a loss of company, as seen more recently, for example, with OceanGate. The social risks of these accidents can arguably be the most punishable, not only with the public backlash because of deaths occurring and government funding loss, but people themselves can be affected, such as family, friends, brothers, and sisters can lose their own loved ones. The trustworthiness of a company from the public can be destroyed when a company overlooks key safety issues and decides to push on without the right protocols. The next one I'll be talking about is the known risks of the Apollo 1 mission itself, including the engineering design failures, the assembly failures, and then the human failures. Some of the engineering design failures include combustible material in the command module, the cabin being pressurized with pure oxygen gas, which is extremely combustible and therefore helped fuel the fire that ended up killing all three astronauts. The three hatches took 90 seconds to open in total and also required a tool, which when the emergency happened and the astronauts had an egress out of the command module, they could not get out in time because of that. And the astronauts could not get out in time, not only because of the three hatches and the long time, but also because they engineered it so that it would take that the hatches opened inward. And since the pressurized cabin was highly pressurized, of course, the hatches would not be able to open to allow the astronauts to egress. According to a report review board document, there were 113 significant work orders, which are items that needed to be fixed before launch. Despite Apollo 1 needing all these repairs, they still gave the approval of flight worthiness for the spacecraft. Some of the assembly failures include vulnerable wiring carrying power to the spacecraft, and there was actually a wrench socket found on the floor of the command module during the investigation after the fact. Some human failures include other organizations working with NASA on this project failing to identify key safety issues that were critical for success, reports of workers stepping on wires during the assembly and construction, as well as some miscommunication internally between the astronauts and many personnel at NASA. There was a quote from Gus that said, "How are we going to get to the moon if we can't talk between three buildings?" And this really emphasizes the fact that the astronauts and even the NASA personnel getting them out to space were not communicating well. And now I'll pass it on to David for the in-depth analysis of the ethics.
Thank you, Colby. My name is David Mitrovich. I'm a second year here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and today I'll be touching on the ethical side of the Apollo 1 disaster. Before I get into that, though, I do want to introduce you all to the crew. On the left, we have Edward White, aged 36 at the time of the disaster. He was a West Point and University of Michigan graduate. He was a Air Force officer and also a photographer in his free time. To his right was the oldest member of the crew, Gus Grissom. He was 40 years old. He was a Purdue graduate. He was a veteran in not only World War One or World War II, but also the Korean War. And his nickname, Gus, his real name's Virgil, came from grade school, where a student or a classmate of his misread his name tag and saw Gris as Gus, and then it just stuck with him for the rest of his life. Then to the right is the youngest member of the crew, Roger Chaffee, age 31. He graduated from the University of Purdue, but initially went to the Institute or the Illinois Institute of Technology, and he was a very, very talented navigator and aviator in the military. And a fun fact about him is that he met his wife on a blind double date in 1955 and actually married her in a little over a year after that. Each of these men had families, wives, children, people that cared about them, and people that they cared about. The most important thing, though, is that they were human, much like you and me. And unfortunately, like Mike mentioned before me, they passed away January 27th, 1967. Their cause of death was carbon monoxide poisoning, but something I do really want to touch on is that in the coroner report, they were alive long enough to experience at least a portion of the burns that their bodies would have in finality. And that brings us to our main ethical dilemma, progress versus life. And in many ways, NASA chose progress. Like I mentioned before, JFK told the world that the US would have a man on the moon by 1970. NASA got to work after successful Mercury and Gemini missions. They grew lackadaisical. They started cutting corners, taking shortcuts, getting things out quicker to get to the moon quicker. The Block 1 cockpit was unsafe, rushed, and built with little care. And like Colby said, there were 113 open work orders, 113 items that should have been completed, but NASA hand waved it and approved it for testing anyways. Another additional detail is that the crew members actually donned a almost entirely flammable suit. And it actually took 90 minutes, an hour and a half, to remove the bodies from the ship after the hatch had been opened because they were physically fused to the inside of the capsule. In hindsight, the swaths of engineering failures are unacceptable by today's standards. And after the fact, the only thing that we can do is hold accountability. Colby touched on the technical side of that, but the deaths of these men changed the ethical approach, the human side of it, in NASA forever. Something that I do believe highlights this is a speech given by Gene Kranz, the director of Mission Control, 3 days after their deaths. From this day forward, flight control will be known by two words, tough and competent. Tough means that we are forever accountable for what we do or what we fail to do, and competent means that we will never take anything for granted. We will be perfect. Every day when you enter your room, these words will remind you of the price paid by Grissom, White, and Chaffee. That these words are the price of admission to the ranks of Mission Control. And finally, before Max wraps everything up, I want to touch on the saying at the top of this slide. Ad astra means to the stars, and on the gravestone, per spera is through hardship. The deaths of these three pilots will never be in vain, and Edward White, Gus Grissom, and Roger Chaffee will never be forgotten. Thank you.
To wrap it up, Apollo 1 was the initial testing to send Americans to the moon in 1967. It is infamous for the deaths of the three astronauts, mainly due to poor safety procedures, less than ideal designs, and careless workmanship. If NASA or any other space agencies are not able to learn from the mistakes of Apollo 1, they will be unnecessarily risking the lives of their crew. We'll have to spend a bunch of extra money fixing rookie mistakes. Could face legal repercussions. We'll lose trust from their employees and the country. We'll face a ton of social backlash. Apollo 1 was also riddled with ethical dilemmas. Mainly, we question whether or not NASA should have rushed through this project without ensuring the safety of the astronauts. That's all we've got for you guys today. We'd like to thank everyone for their time and open the floor to some questions.